Want to give folks just another minute here to jump in. Want to thank everyone who's attended so far. Thank you for joining us. We're about to get started and get this show on the road. I'm excited. I know John's excited. We have a lot to talk about here, so no, we're going to go ahead and jump in. I want to thank everyone for coming. We're going to be, welcome, right? First and foremost, welcome. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time on a Wednesday afternoon. We're going to be covering a fair few very important topics, and I think this resonates with many of you out there. Really looking forward to kind of diving into some of these evolving threats, right? Things that we're seeing out here from the cybersecurity landscape and understanding kind of where we're sitting today from a modern perspective, right? A lot of us have already set up some strong cybersecurity controls, but we know that those controls are always moving and always adjusting. So we're going to go ahead and take a look here. So again, thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and jump in and we can go ahead to the next slide. So the webinar agenda for today, we're going to be talking a little bit about IT and cybersecurity governance. We're going to get that right off the bat. And some of you might be thinking, hey, why, right? We're talking about emerging threats and things like that. We're going to talk about why that's such an important piece, right? And why it's kind of a foundational piece of your cybersecurity or even IT frameworks going forward. We'll look at emerging cybersecurity, privacy, and AI regulations. A lot of this webinar is going to be speaking about AI and how AI is changing the cybersecurity landscape and the IT landscape. We know that there's nothing we do today that we don't hear something about AI, right? And so what does that mean? What does it mean from a business perspective? What does it mean for you, your clients, right? What does it mean from a regulation or framework perspective? And we're going to be taking a deep look into that as well. And then we'll also take and talk about a trend towards virtual security teaming, right? So what does that mean? What does it mean when you have your IT infrastructure, your cybersecurity teams? How do you expand that, right? How do you make sure that you are doing everything you possibly can in order to support your growing business, right? To either excel or launch yourself into further growth or even maintaining the status quo, right? And kind of keeping yourself safe. And then incident response and emerging focuses, right? What is it about incident response and why are we going to spend so much time, right? This is going to kind of go and tie right back up to that cybersecurity and IT governance piece. But let's talk about who's on the call today, right? So we'll take up to the next slide here, right? My name is Drew Rosado. Some of you know me, some of you don't. For those of you that know me, hello, right? For those of you who don't, thanks for coming, right? It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at CBIZ CompuData. I sit as not only the Director of Customer Success, but also a VCIO for many of our clients, right? Kind of an outsourced or fractional CIO role. I come to you all, right, with about over 10 years of experience in IT world. I've come from the roles of technology director and CIO for various organizations, helping organizations grow and scale as they can, as they want to meet larger business goals. How do we align that IT plan along with those business goals to ensure that they have continued success? And from CBIZ Pivot Point, I'm going to throw this over to John Verry to give himself a nice little introduction.
I'll make it brief. John Verry. I'm the lead managing director for our national cybersecurity practice. I've been doing this longer than I care to admit, and our focus every day is on helping organizations manage information-related risk. These days, that also includes a lot of privacy work and a lot of work in managing AI risk as well. Helping organizations, align with and or get certified to open trusted frameworks. Think things like ISO 27001 and CMMC and FedRAMP and HITRUST and those types of standards as well. A lot of technical assessments, validating the critical networks, applications, clouds are secure. And then, as we'll get into, increasingly more of that virtual CISO, virtual security teaming, as we're seeing a trend in the industry towards that.
And John, you're going to come with a very interesting perspective, right? You've seen technology, the changes in technology, but also the trends in cybersecurity, right? Kind of from when we kind of really had these two disparate teams, right? To kind of the merging of those two and the blurring of those lines.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. So as we get started here, right, let's go ahead and jump in. We do encourage you, right, there is a Q&A in here. We're going to have a Q&A section, but if you have questions during the session, we highly encourage you to drop those questions right into the chat. We're going to be moderating that chat So if you have any questions, we're going to try to take those and answer them as they are relevant to the slides as we're going through the presentation, right? We'd like to have this more as like an open dialogue, much more, a little bit more conversational than maybe most webinars, but trying to get some of those questions answered in the moment, right? As much as we possibly can. Otherwise, any rollover questions will be answered at the end, right? We're going to be taking a look at all that. So let's start at the very top, right? Looking at IT and cybersecurity governance. What is it, right? Let's just start there. It's a big question. Usually when we start talking about IT and cybersecurity governance, there's usually a big question, right? What does it mean, right? And IT governance really kind of very loosely, right, is centered around making sure the organization knows what impact IT decisions have on a business value, right, or on a business growth trajectory, right, or even day-to-day operations. Similarly, right, cybersecurity governance is going to be a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy that integrates with organizational operations and prevents interruption, right? That's the goal, right? And it's basically understanding your IT stack. For many years, especially in growing companies, right? If you're in the small to mid-sized market, this may have just been done. This may be handled by your MSP, right? If you're using a third party, or maybe it's an individual in your organization that is managing some of these, some of what we would consider the IT governance. But the question would always come in is, do you have a documented, a formal process that you understand, right? That really kind of lays out what you do from an IT perspective and also from a cybersecurity perspective. And then the really kind of the big goals that we're looking at here is, right, does your IT support your current and future goals, right? Does your IT and cybersecurity practices currently support what you're doing today and what you want to do in the future? And is it providing oversight and strategic planning, right? Are you able to take what you're doing from an IT and cybersecurity perspective and really align it with business goals to grow, right? And a lot of the reason why I put this here, right? And I really like this topic, and I know, John, we can talk all day about just this topic alone, but it's that alignment of business strategy and business and IT is such a big piece, right? And we're starting to see it become more and more prevalent across multiple frameworks, across the insurance policy renewals, right? This is something that we're starting to see come up a lot, right? Is, do you understand what you're doing from an IT perspective? Because the field has changed so dramatically over the years. Do you have a current understanding of what you're doing today and how it's impacting you in the future, right? And so,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Drew, the critical thing there is that very often, either from an IT transition or information security transition, these transitions, because of the complexity of technology now, the complexity of these regulatory requirements, client contractual obligations, can often take 12 to 24 months, to achieve.
Yeah.
So like we might be working with a client, we've helped them get, let's say, ISO 27001 certified, and they're selling like gangbusters into the commercial marketplace, and management wants to pursue, federal marketplace. They've got to let ITIS know that 18 months, 2 years ahead of them where they want to get to that point, because it's going to take that long to get through, let's say, a FedRAMP ATO process. If we're going to be, changing clients and processing different forms of data. We have a client that's moving in, and now we're going to be processing a lot more personal information, which brings in 20 state privacy regulations, right? Building a comprehensive privacy program that holds up against GDPR and CCPA and the other 19 US state standards. It's not uncommon that that's going to take an organization somewhere between 6 and 18 months. So you got to let your IS team know that ahead of time. So that's why this alignment of that business strategy and driving IT, the investments that need to be made, the changes that need to be made from a technology perspective, and the things that we need to support you from a cyber perspective are just so critical right now.
Yeah, I think that's super important, John. We're great points here, right? Especially on the fact that this isn't an overnight process, right? Making one of those shifts is not something that you do on a whim, right? You don't just say, hey, we're going to go for a new market and off we go, right? This is a well thought out process. And in addition to that, right, especially looking at some of the topics we're going to talk about today here in just a moment, right, is also taking into consideration those other components, right? Hey, what does AI look like? What does privacy look like? How do these other frameworks and legislations, right, both state, locally and federally and globally, right? What does all that look like, and how does that play into all of this, right? And I think that's always a big question. I think maybe some thoughts on that. Hey, this is easy, right? It's just a document. it's not just a document, right? It's not just a plan. There's a lot more to this, right? Everything from tooling to certainly the planning of it, but then also implementation, testing, reassessing, all of those things come into this. Awesome. Uh, we'll go ahead and so let's just dive in, right? So we're talking about emerging cybersecurity and privacy AI regulations. This is really kind of what probably brought many of you here, right? What is the landscape looking like? What is changing? And we know that a lot of this goes around with AI, right? A lot has changed, especially in the last, let's say, 4 years, right? And so what's changing? What are we looking at? And so we're going to jump into it. John, I'm going to hand this one over to you because this is, very solidly in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, what we live every day.
Right.
Yeah, I'll steal a line that I heard in somebody else's webinar probably about a year ago, but I thought it was so perfect, and I'm going to perhaps bollocks it a bit, but it was something to the extent of things have never moved this fast before, and they will never move this slow again. And
Mhm.
I think especially now with AI advancing at the rate that it is, that holds true. And what we're also
Yeah.
seeing is, again, this never-ending advancement of regulatory guidance out there. So, this is just stuff which is relatively updated or new in the last year, 2 years. So anyone that's in the manufacturing space that might work with the defense industrial base might be familiar with CMMC and the requirements that there. If you are in that space and you're not moving towards CMMC, this is a great example of where if you haven't already started moving, you're behind the wave, if you will. By the way, if you're in the manufacturing space and you're not working in the defense industrial base, but you're working in the automotive space, another standard that's not mentioned here is TISAX, TISAX. A lot of our clients in the automotive supply chain are getting beat up by that. The payment card industry data security standard, if you do process credit cards, do make sure that the folks on your team that are responsible for PCI DSS compliance are up to date on version 4. Significant changes there. We've seen some clients get into a little bit of trouble when they weren't able to get there. That came into effect in March. I mentioned that there's 20 plus U.S. state privacy regulations. I'm sure many of you are familiar if you're processing information about individuals. We call it personal information. Please do know that personal information used to mean one thing and now means something else. In the old days, when we talked about breach notification laws, personal information meant privileged identifiers. It meant credit card numbers. It meant checking account numbers, social security numbers, passport IDs, things of that nature. Now, personal information means your dog's name, your sexual orientation, your political party affiliation, children's names, literally anything that can be used to potentially identify an individual or their household. So these new laws, right, starting with GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation coming out of the EU, have now been mirrored in 20 US states. Incredibly robust. An individual has the right to know what information you have. You have to present it to them. You have to tell them how you acquired it, what your lawful right to process that data is, and you have to give them the ability to edit it and or completely delete it. So think about like the process of doing human resources, and we're interviewing people and the number of resumes that get floated around, right? They get emailed around. In theory, you need to, under a what's called a data subject access request, be able to show that you've deleted all of that data. So it's a significant undertaking. So be aware that if you are an organization that is processing a lot of personal information, you may soon be subject to significant regulation. That ISO 27701 is the world's best answer right now to complying with state privacy regulations. DORA is the Digital Operations Resilience Act coming out of the EU. It deals with financial entities, probably won't have that much effect directly on most people on this call, unless you're providing what they call ICT, information communication technology. So you're a SaaS provider, cloud service provider, something of that nature to them. The reason I put it on here, though, is that it speaks to something else we see on the other side at the door with the SRM, is that there's this focus on supply chain risk management. Resilience is a big issue right now, which means that any of your clients that rely on you to deliver some form of service are going to be interested in where you are from a perspective of your resilience. We talked about the AI. We'll talk about that a little bit further later on. But be aware of the NIST AI risk management framework. That's the U.S. government's guidance on that. There's something called the EU AI Act. That's if you're going to sell your AI, if you are developing AI and it's being sold or used in the European Union. There's some very specific guidance on what that needs to do in order for it to be authorized to be sold there. 42001, ISO 42001 is an answer to that. It is an AI risk management framework. If you are somebody that develops software, as an example, that uses AI, a lot of our clients that do that are now moving towards ISO 42001 certification to demonstrate to their clients that they've got open, trustworthy, non-biased implementation of artificial intelligence. Be aware, if depending upon where you are, there are specific laws that govern your use of AI already, rapidly emerging field. One of the first was the New York City Bias Act, which basically said you're not allowed to use AI to make decisions in human resources unless you've conducted what they call bias impact assessment, which is basically you need to have an AI governance program and validate that the software that you're using can demonstrate that it does not exhibit bias. The Colorado AI Act we're seeing that model rolled out in many places. In short, what it says is if you use a third-party AI, right, SaaS application that is using AI, and it makes a bad decision, let's say it exhibits bias, you will be held accountable for that, unless you have a robust AI governance program and you've done sufficient due diligence on the third party. You guys have probably seen the GLB FTC safeguards and the SEC cyber disclosure, new government regulations. The big thing there that I think it's so important for folks to know about, again, cyber disclosure is something that we're seeing in a lot of new client contracts. We're seeing in a lot of new regulations. That's the idea of being able to very rapidly identify materiality of a security incident and actually get that incident reported to folks, whether it's a governing body, a regulatory agency, or your clients in short order. Secure Software Development Framework and other guidance on ensuring that our applications are being developed secure based on Presidential Executive Order, I think it was 14028. And if you guys, anyone that's using NIST guidance for their control environment, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which is a great standard, version 2 came out. What's interesting and relevant to today, we're talking a lot about governance. What changed in this CSFV2? They added a 6th function, and that's the governance function. So I think it doubles down on why we're here talking about this stuff.
100%. And these are some of just the emerging, right, frameworks that we're seeing. This is not in addition, John, to anything else that's also changing in the existing frameworks, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, we're not getting into HIPAA and
HIPAA and high
trust DFS 500 and the dozens of other regulations that people need to cover.
Yeah, so even beyond that, right? So, and I know for those of you out there, right, this looks like a lot of alphabet soup, right? And we get that. And some of these are going to be really relevant to you, and some of them are maybe not. But the one thing to also remember is that there are, even the frameworks that are being held against today, there are changes coming, right? If they haven't already changed, there's all these new technologies, AI being a big piece of this, right? You're going to start seeing that reflected in those frameworks as well, right? If you're not already.
Yeah, and this, by the way, IAPP has a map. If you search IAPP state privacy map, this is where this comes from. Fantastic resource to stay current on, like what's going on in my state or what's going on in the state where my employees or my clients, customers live.
Awesome. That's a lot of colors on that map.
It's getting there. It's getting there.
A lot of changes coming up. So how do we leverage it, right? What are we leveraging AI without incurring additional risk? And we know that this is everywhere, right? And there's AI being built into almost every SaaS application that we know out there, right? Everyone is touting that they have AI on the back end. But what does that mean? It sounds really cool from a feature functionality perspective, right? Maybe even a workflow perspective, but ultimately, what does it mean? And so we're going to go ahead and jump in, right? And let's take a look at some of the risk components here, right? We have certainly 2 different types of risk, right? We have AI development risk and AI use risk, right? Or what we call shadow AI. John, what are we looking at here from an AI development risk? And this is, this is strictly you are developing the AI, right? You are developing and using the large language model on the back end.
Yeah, I always like to kind of just break it down because I think this helps people kind of understand this. There's the risk associated with development, and we'll list some of those on one of the next slides.
Sure.
Many of the people here are not developing their own AI, their internal applications. I get that. If you are, there's a lot that you need to do. That being said, everyone that's on this call is making extensive use of AI. And that's through the fact that, as you alluded to, depending upon who you believe, roughly 40% of all SaaS apps that you're currently using, right? So like I use Grammarly. Grammarly's got AI built
Yeah.
in. I've used
Yep.
Wrike.
100%.
Wrike has AI built into it. I use Bing. Bing has AI built into it. I use Copilot. Even if I'm using, ChatGPT, I'm using like even the things that I know are AI, but some of the things that I don't even know are AI are actually AI, right?
Right.
So I saw the data supports that even in a small to medium sized business, you can see the average is 335 SaaS applications. It sounds crazy, but I did a personal census and I use about 35 myself. So kind of makes sense, right? So
Oh,
if you say 40% of those or so have SaaS currently enabled, excuse me, AI currently enabled, that puts you roughly 120-ish applications that you're currently using that have AI enabled.
yeah.
So that's what the risk is, right? And we call that shadow AI because we just don't know what applications are being used and we don't know what data is being shared. We don't know what risk it poses. If you go to the next slide, I think we'll start to drill into this.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So, like I said, the biggest thing you need to worry about from your perspective is what information is being shared with who, how, and what do I need to do to understand the risk that's associated with it and manage that risk effectively, right? So, the question I always start with is, do you have an acceptable use policy? Have you, that's the first place to start. In order to have an acceptable use policy, you sort of need to do sort of call it an AI inventory, at least get a rough idea of what people are doing with AI, what kind of data is being shared, what kind of risks that puts you at, so that that acceptable use policy can appropriately guide people so that we're not taking on risk, right? So maybe you'd have a policy that says we're not going to use AI when it comes to establishing. We're not going to use to screen resumes because it might exhibit bias, which told us in EEOC for things. Maybe you're in the financial services industry. You're not going to use it to set interest rates, right? Because it might discriminate against a particular class of or race of individuals or something of that nature. So once we kind of have that inventory, the next thing is that acceptable use policy, and then well, how do we actually ensure that the AI that we're authorizing for use has been developed in a manner which is consistent with requirements, right? The EU AI Act, this AI Risk Management Framework, ISO 42001. You need to ask, right? So that you probably heard the term vendor risk management or vendor due diligence, right? You should update your vendor risk management processes so that way you're aware of who is using, which SaaS apps have AI, and are they being effectively developed? And what we're trying to limit is the types of things that you see on the right. Hallucinations, like famous hallucinations, or AI does not give answers, right? AI makes predictions. It's a big important thing to understand. AI is mathematical predictions to no matter what you ask. So very famously, Google told people the best way to keep cheese on pizza was glue, right? That was its answer. If you delve down into it, it's because it doesn't understand sarcasm. And there was an extensive Reddit thread. What a surprise! On using glue to keep cheese on pizza. Very famously, people have actually, you got to be careful if you put your client's data or your sensitive data, intellectual property, into a lot of the AI tools, they get used for training and they may become part of answers to somebody else. Samsung very famously put source code. Guy was having problems with his code. He pasted source code into an online AI tool, and that source code and intellectual property was given back to somebody else.
Yeah. And I
So
think this is
those are some
really
of the
important.
examples of what we're trying to manage.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is super important that we talk about this. I know I've had numerous conversations, right? And John, you're probably having these conversations on a daily basis, right? And day in, day out. But the lack of awareness is one thing, right? A lot of folks aren't realizing that some of these SaaS tools that they're using have some type of AI built in, right? So question number one is, what taking an inventory, right? What do you have today? What are you using? Let's understand that. And that's always part of a good just asset management, right? From a software asset management list, right? Always a good place to start. Any good security starts with the assets that you have. So you have a strong foundation knowing going forward. And then it's the governance piece of it, right? Which is really kind of the scary piece, right? Especially if you're an organization who is held to some type of regulation, right? Let's say something like HIPAA, right? Or CMMC and NIST, right? Those are the world that I kind of live in on a regular basis. Um, having that vendor risk management process, this is a key component to that, right? Like this is something that everyone should have. But I think the big thing that has been missing is, do you use AI, right? And what AI are you using? What are you collecting? How are you using that? Where is it stored, right? And these are questions that we haven't had to ask before, right? And now these are questions that are really becoming kind of key questions going forward, right? Like we need to have these conversations at the front end, even when selecting a new vendor, right? Or a new application.
Right. You don't want your data to be used when they're training their model.
100%. Right. And I think that's a big conversation. I know I've had that conversation with many folks on this call, right? Is, hey, we want to use Chat GPT, right? And it's a great tool. I think we all agree, right? It's not to be, this isn't certainly to incite fear, right? Hey, we know that these AI tools are really great. They're really powerful. They're super helpful, kind of day-to-day workflows. Hey, I want to use Chat GPT. You got to be very selective as to what you're feeding that, right? That is a large language model that is collecting all that and learning from it, right, on a regular basis. So you really need to be careful what it is that you're feeding what you're feeding to there. If you wanted to generate a quick email, maybe a quick response, maybe, right? We could talk about that from a generative standpoint, but in terms of what you're feeding it is really becoming a concern because you could be inadvertently setting yourself up to be in a really dangerous position, right? And
Yeah, and
sharing.
by the way, I agree completely. This is not about not using AI. I'm
Right.
a fan, and you should use AI. I think in order for your business to stay competitive, you better be figuring out
You
how
have
to
to.
use AI,
Yeah.
because I can tell you everybody else is.
Yep.
It's a matter of just using it safely, right? There are switches, there are configuration settings for the use of these public LLMs that will reduce risk just by you turn it on. Do not use my data, in this way.
Right.
You can control that. Or if many of the companies that we work with are setting up private instances of these tools. So
Yeah.
that way, I can enter my internal intellectual property in, use the benefits of ChatGPT or Claude or Llama or whatever other
Yeah.
AI foundational model you want to use, but you're not actually running the risk that that data is actually leaving your organization.
Correct. Yeah. You're creating that kind of walled garden in that situation, right? And you're
Yep,
keeping it
exactly.
safe. Absolutely. All right. We can
Next
keep
slide.
going, right?
Yep, next slide.
Um,
So I am not gonna, this is an eyeball test and this is gonna be
Good.
painful. And most of you are not developing AI. If anyone on this call is developing AI, hopefully you've seen something that looks like this, and hopefully you're actually dealing with all of these issues.
Right.
If you are not, that is a problem.
Yeah.
And if we can be helpful and you want to chat about these a little bit more in depth, I'd be happy to do that. I just put it here for information, not for to bore you with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're also starting to see a huge trend towards virtual security teaming, right? And this is a fun topic, John. We could spend probably, again, all day on this topic alone, right? If we had another 2 or 3 hours, we could probably do a whole other webinar. But let's jump into this a little bit, right? So what does it mean? What are we seeing here? Um, right, from a trend towards this virtual security teaming, we're seeing some massive shifts, right? First, cyber is following the same arc that we saw IT go through, right? And you were seeing the vCISO becoming very much more popular, right? Just like the vCIO was very popular. And this is because we're starting to see kind of the traditional disparate lines, right? The, hey, this is security, hey, this is IT, hey, that's regular business function, right? Accounting, things like that. And we're starting to see those lines blur tremendously, right? And I think we see this a lot. I know you and I have been on many conversations, and me, along, the CBIZ CompuData team and CBIZ Pivot Point team, right? We've been in this kind of significantly lately, and we're starting to see these lines blend, right? Where does security end and where does IT pick up?
And I'd even go a little bit further. Where does the advisory and assessment components of
Mm,
security end, and where does the operational components of security begin? Right? Because
mm,
one of the cool things about the way that we work together is, like, historically, we respected these disparate lines. Right.
yeah,
So historically, CBIZ Pivot Point Security, we were acquired by CBIZ a little over a year ago, 15 months or so ago. We were
right,
traditionally what was referred to as an advisory and assessment firm, right? We
right,
lived on the side of, we're not going to touch your systems, we're not going to log in, we're not going to implement any technology, we're not going to sell you any technology. We are going to consultatively guide you to be secure and compliant, provably so, and we're going to be able to test and validate that that's the case. And then we would hand it off to guys like you to be able to say, okay, here, 365 needs to be set up in this way. We want
Correct.
CIS benchmarking enabled. We want this, we want that. And then we have
Right.
the folks that do the MSSP, which is
Yeah.
traditionally just Security Operations Center. And
Right.
what's happened is the Security Operations Center people started doing your MSP stuff. The MSP stuff started doing our advisory and assessment stuff.
Correct.
That kind of forced people that are in the advisory and assessment stuff to kind of move upstream. And like traditionally, clients wanted us to all be separate. But what we've seen now, like in the old days, like
Yeah.
people would say, wait a second, if you're going to assess my systems, you can't make recommendations as to what I should
Right.
buy, right?
Right.
Because that would break that independent, objective view of
Yeah.
the world.
Conflict of interest there,
Yeah,
things that we're trying
yeah.
to avoid. Yeah.
Now clients are like, okay, that's great, but can you do it for me too? And
Can
you're
you
like, wait a
fix it at the same time?
second.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's the clients that are really dragging us here, and it's this, and it really is the same arc. If you think about, when did like IT outsourcing start? Like it was probably back in the, whatever it was when Microsoft Exchange was always one of those really
Right.
complex, hard systems to
Correct.
administer, really unique skill set, very expensive skill set. People couldn't afford it, so
Right.
you started by doing that. Then you were just outsourcing servers. Then you started, and now all of a sudden, many organizations don't have internal IT people, right?
Right.
I,
Yeah. No,
I
and I think
think we're going to
it's
see the same thing from a security perspective in many, many organizations in the next 5 years, where it's going to be like, hell, we can't do this anymore. I think it ties into as well as we've become more and more differentiated and complex, right? Much
right.
the same way, like you could go to a general practitioner as a doctor, but that doctor is, he's not an oncologist, he's not a cardiologist, he's not a
Right.
proctologist, he's not an osteopath, he's not, like, you think about, like, medicine is not one field, right? Medicine is 20 or 30 distinct, maybe more modalities. That's how we're becoming from a cyber perspective, right?
Yeah.
Identity and access management is a completely different field than incident response. Business continuity is a different field. Application security is a different field. Artificial intelligence is a different field. Privacy is a different field. So organizations, if you're a small org and you need to deal with all of that stuff, it's impossible to hire one person to do all that, which
And
is
I'll tell you,
where virtual security teaming, where you're hiring one org that has those skills,
yeah,
and it's
and I'll
sort of
tell you from
fractional across all of them. That, I think that's one of the other things driving it.
yeah, and I'll tell you from because I came from internal IT, right, before coming here to CompuData, CBIZ CompuData, right, and I can tell you the stress, right, and the funny, not funny, funny to me, right, the statement that we typically make is like, hey, if it runs on electricity, it's an IT problem, right? If it plugs into the wall, it's an IT problem, and that's typically how everything was seen from a corporate level. It's like, hey, I plugged it in. It's supposed to do X, Y, and Z. It's not doing it. Send it to IT. Those lines quickly blurred into, hey, if it's a security issue, that's an IT problem, right? That lives solidly with the IT department. And we know that those skill sets are sometimes very, very different, right? And the idea and the thinking in both of those can be very different, right? That's why we have roles like a CIO and a CISO, right? Two different kind of approaches, and certainly keeping the environment safe, right, and up and operational, but two different approaches to it, right? Two different views, and certainly now some overlap. I think one of the biggest things, and you've alluded to it already, right, is that there's just a talent issue here, right? That many companies aren't going to be able, especially the small and mid-sized business, right? The SMBs aren't going to be able to afford, to bring in a full-time CIO or director of tech and a full-time CISO or director of IT security, right? And even if they did, let's say, hey, you have these two people sitting at that strategic level, right? That high level, there's still a lot of the day-to-day blocking and tackling that needs to occur that just can't be done easily, right? And we're starting to see more and more folks saying, hey, we can, we have our line of business, we know what we do really, really well. We don't know IT, let's outsource it, right? We saw that trend already. Now it's the same thing is coming back, especially with greater regulation, with stronger frameworks coming into play, with stronger requirements, especially from an IT governance perspective, right? It's, hey, we know what we do really well from a day-to-day operations perspective. We don't know this stuff from an IT perspective or from a cybersecurity perspective, right? And we need to find a partner that can do that, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah,
so
we've
many
seen people
times,
hire like a CISO
yeah,
and be disappointed because, like, they weren't able to kind of advance things, and it really makes sense. It's hiring a CISO is kind of like hiring an architect because you want to build a house,
right,
and
right,
that's the first step, right? But the architect is going to develop the plan. You still got to go out and hire a general contractor. General contractor has to go out and he needs to hire roofers, plumbers, people put the siding up.
Yep.
HVAC, electricians,
Sure.
painters, right? People do your woodwork. So, that's sort of the same thing with both IT and InfoSec these days, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of different skill sets that are necessary, to have a, comprehensive, effective, ITIS program. And
Sure.
that's, I think, is driving a lot of this virtual security teaming as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's kind of bridging the gap, right? There's absolutely the tooling, right? There's absolutely the governance piece of it. And these are just kind of bringing it all together, right? So you have one solidified, team working on this, right? With multiple resources that can all jump in and put their hands in for it. So
Yep.
absolutely. We certainly see a trend for this, right? This is absolutely something that we see coming up. But this is this last one here, right? Why incident response is an emerging focus, right? Some folks here might say, hey, like we've known about this, we hear about this all the time, but this is such a critical piece, right? Such a critical piece going forward. So let's go ahead and advance the slide here because we had a long conversation about this, right? And we said it's not an if, but when, right? It's not an if, but when there's going to be an event, right? And statistically, we know that there's going to be an event, right? Again, approximately 70% of small and mid-sized businesses are experiencing a cyber attack, right, or data breach. These are known stats. We know that SMBs are seeing more of these attacks on a regular basis, right? We know that email is a big proponent of that, right? I think 90% of all cyber attacks come through email, right? And so there's some knowledge there. But what does it mean to have an incident response plan going forward, right? Why is incident response such a key component? Um, and why are we bringing it up now, right? Again, this is something that's probably old hat for some folks, right? But again, we're seeing this kind of greater call for it, not only in different frameworks and different regulations that we're seeing out there that are being developed or even being modified into their most recent iterations, but we know it's just a matter of time, right? It's just a matter of time at this point.
Yeah, we went from doing, occasional incident response tests to almost
Yeah,
having a full-time person who does nothing except execute incident response testing for clients. Like the
yeah,
demand is through the roof. It's crazy. And I think it's a couple things. One is there's a recognition that you're going to have a security event. And a good incident response plan that's tested and validated and well thought out and proven to be so will reduce the likelihood that an event becomes an incident, with an incident having some form of impact to your organization. The second thing is, do we have the slide on this or no? Is there another slide, Michelle, on this? I don't remember if we put another
yeah.
slide on.
We have a few more slides here. So
Okay,
yeah,
yeah. So
yep,
yeah, because that's the other thing which we're seeing is that there's a huge emphasis this, right? So any of our clients in the banking industry, whether it's an FDIC, SEC, OCIE, cybersecurity suite, New York State DFS 500, all of the auditors are saying, "Let me see a copy of the incident response plan, and let me
yeah.
see a recent cyber
Test.
liability insurance. You can't get it without incident
Yeah,
response and with a recent test of that." If you look at all of the government guidance, right, Critical Infrastructure Act, things that all of the privacy regs, every one of the regulations, most of that you saw in that eye chart I gave you a bunch of
yep,
slides ago, they're
yeah,
all emphasizing this. If you're ISO 27001 certified, SOC 2 attested, same kind of thing. So, I think this is something that's really critical if you're selling to third parties, right? If you're a provider to third parties, that DORA and the focus on resilience. A big part of resilience is ensuring that you've got incident response testing and likely business continuity testing as well. And what's kind
yeah,
of cool is you can do incident response and business continuity testing sort of at the same time by making it a cyber incident that you're testing that
yeah, yeah.
causes a business, some
Sure.
kind of continuity outage.
Yeah, I think it's so telling, right? And again, you mentioned all the same places I would have mentioned, right? Whether it's the frameworks or it's cyber liability insurance, right? It doesn't matter. They're all asking for it, right? And it's no longer just a checkbox, right? I think I remember at one point, a number of years ago, it was just a do you have it, right? Check the box yes, right? Or check the box no, and it was a kind of a self-attestation. Now it's no longer that. It's a can you provide us with a copy of your incident response plan? Right? Can you tell us what you're going to do, right? In the event that there is an incident, regardless of the incident. And then the very next question that comes in after that is, when was the last time you tested this? right? So it's one thing to have it, right? It's one thing to spend the time to draft it, but is it living and breathing? Is it a living and breathing document that you're modifying, that you're testing, that you're going through the testing process and then providing the revisions on, to ensure that you know what the proper steps are to, break the glass and pull the lever should something occur, right? And it's no longer just a nice to have, it's a requirement, right? Across the board, 100%. The one thing, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the other part about the testing, which is important, is a lot of people are going to go like, oh, why do I need to test it, right?
Right, right.
If you don't test your incident response business continuity plans at least once a year, and I know that sounds crazy, you should do your own review of it probably every 6 months. And the reason I say that is because every change in your organization, right? New technology, new applications, new people, new clients, right?
Yeah,
Changes your incident response plan. I don't know how
right.
many times that I've gone into organizations after an attack or after a breach, and you pick up the plan, and the plan was 2 or 3 years old, and the first thing was call Bill. Bill hadn't worked there in a year and a half. The
Yeah,
second thing
yeah,
was it shut down the Exchange server. We moved Exchange to the cloud a year and a half ago. Like everything was like out of whack, right? I mean, you
yeah.
couldn't use the plan at that point. So it is important. I mean, there's value to your business to actually do this beyond just the regulatory compliant or just the contractual obligation requirement.
Right. And it's important here. And I know you and I have talked about this at length, but my favorite is, well, we have backup,
Mhm.
right? And it's like, yes, that's great, right? And always from an IT perspective, right? And from a cybersecurity perspective, always have solid backups, right? That's really important. But that is not a plan, right? That's a way of getting out of an incident, right? That's certainly hopefully an easy way out of an incident in many cases, but that is not the plan, right? That doesn't initiate the activities to get you out of a sticky situation, right? Should one occur. Um,
Yeah, one other
so
thing too is that
yep,
many of the people on this call probably have cyber liability insurance.
yep,
If you have cyber liability insurance, you need to look at your incident response plan right away and make sure that the cyber liability insurance provider and whatever caveats and requirements are included in their policy to you are included in your incident response plan. I have seen clients that have large, large cyber liability insurance policies have security incidents and then go to make a claim, but because they didn't actually follow those requirements, right? So the requirements loosely say that early on in the process, you need to alert them,
right,
and then you have to have what's referred to as an authorized response vendor.
right,
So, like if you called me up and said, hey, John, I think we were hacked. Can you come in and investigate it? I would say no, right? You need to get approval for us to do that from your
right,
cyber liability insurance provider, or you need to use somebody who's already on their list. So please,
right.
please, please make sure you look at your policy, make sure that the 800 number that's there, they're going to provide what's called a breach counselor. They're going to
Yep.
provide a lawyer, a cyber lawyer, who's going to kind of take you through that process. And if you don't follow their process, they may not pay the claim.
Yeah. And I think it's here, what's really important here, right? And the reason, again, we put this here as an emerging focus, because we're seeing two things are happening, right? One, there's a greater call for it across, again, regulations, insurance, what have you, but also just a massive uptick in cyber attacks, right? And we just know that's not going to slow down, right? That there's no way that we're going to see a slowdown in potential cyber attacks, right? What we're expecting to see is an increase, right? Every year we expect to see more. We expect that, the overall impact of cyber risks or cyber threats are going to increase. And so with that, we're not only seeing it from, again, regulations, but hey, your clients might be asking you for this stuff, right? Because again, to your point, John, right? If you're in the service, if you're some type of service delivery, they want to make sure that their data's safe, right? Because they have to align it. If you're breached or if there's an incident on your side, they're going to have to initiate an incident response on their side, right? And so it's kind of a cascading effect, and you're trying to make sure that the whole chain is as secure, right? You're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And so there's going to be a lot of call to making sure that every link in that chain is as strong as it possibly can be, right? And there's at least enough knowledge there.
Yeah, and by the way, with AI, the
Yeah.
expectation is that we'll see, we're already seeing more and better attacks, right? Because the bad guys are using AI.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
one of the things that I read someone who said, AI now can replicate a malicious individual, So at this point, you no longer need a human sitting there doing it. You can train an AI bot to do a lot of what they do.
Yep.
So now all they need to do is throw more horsepower at it. And instead of having that individual hacker, there's 100 of them or 1,000 of them or 1 million of them, right? Just a matter
Yep.
how much processing power they're willing to pay for from AWS or Azure.
Yep. Yeah. It's really kind of it's a scary time. Really, AI is again super powerful, but it opens the door to so many other things, right? And so again, having these just key items in place, right? Again, is an incident response plan going to save you? Is it going to stop an attacker from trying to attack you? Absolutely not, right? You're still going to be targeted. You could potentially be targeted, or it's going to be an opportunistic attack, right? And most attacks I think we see are opportunistic overall, right? They're not necessarily targeting every company. It's they find a vulnerability or they find a kind of a weak, point in the armor and they attack it, right? And hopefully there's enough security controls in place to kind of, put that or hold it at bay, right? But
Yeah.
if it doesn't, this is how you get out of it.
Yeah, and Drew, on the opportunistic attack, I couldn't agree with you more. That's one of the things which, like, and you probably see it all the time as well.
Yeah.
We're too small to
Yeah.
worry about
Yeah.
this and to be a
Right.
target. And my answer to we're too small is always the same. One is, we're too small to have,
Correct.
enterprise level security. And my answer is always, how big are your customers? Because they're going to
Right.
want the same security level. They're going to give you their data, then you have to have their security posture. So don't tell
Right.
me that you're small because you don't have a choice or you don't do business with them. And then the second thing is when people say, "Nah, we're too small. No one's going to attack us." No one is going. Maybe no one is going to target you,
Yeah.
but this opportunistic attack, most people don't understand like how these occur. These people buy just lists of email addresses and they have no idea who they're emailing. Or you got people, let's say there's a new Joomla vulnerability. They set a vulnerability scanner and they point it to the entire internet and they go to sleep and they wake up in the morning like, oh, here's 50 systems that weren't patched yet. Let me see what I got. And they have no idea. It could be GE or it could
Yep.
be, a guy's house. They have no idea. They'll dig in, look at it. If they can find something that they think they can monetize, they're going to do it.
Yeah. 100%. So again, it goes back to the initial statement, right, that we had a couple slides ago. It's not an if, right? It's kind of a when, right? And hopefully, everyone, hopefully no one here ever has to go through that, right? But in the event that you do, it's always important, right? The same way we looked at, antivirus for years as a safeguard, the same way we looked at EDR when it became a safeguard, right? Spam filtering, all these different solutions. This is just another tool in the or another arrow in the quiver, right? That you can pull out, right? And this is one that you're going to pull out if something occurs, right? And so really big push, right? Again, something that we're seeing across the board is becoming more and more prevalent. Again, from an MSP perspective, we're seeing a lot more clients coming to us asking us, hey, what are we looking at from an incident response plan? What is our process, right? And what is their process? And can we help them build one, right? Can we help them build an incident response plan that matches their business? And again, it's one of those things, right? To our kind of initial IT governance conversation is that this should be part of the IT governance, framework that you're using, but also um, this is something that just needs to be a living, breathing document, right? Like you have to be refreshing it. You have to keep this going. Saying that you have backup is one thing, right? But making sure that you have, how to initiate that backup, right, is another thing. And so super, super important. It's again, we could probably spend all day on this one, right? Any one of these topics we could spend the day on just talking about. And more than happy to do so if anyone wants to have a conversation about it, right? Feel free to reach out. But super important. This is one that's again sitting really close to home because I'm seeing it over and over and over again, especially on the MSP side of things. Uh, all right. I know we're here. We got 10 minutes left or 9 minutes left. Want to go ahead and open it up for any questions, discussions. Again, feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A. We're more than happy to take some questions or even just a point of discussion, right? If you have something that we've said that, kind of got you thinking a little bit, feel free to drop that into the Q&A section there. Here's one, John. Question is, will this deck be available to viewers? Yeah, we're recording the session, so after this, you will get a full copy of the deck and also the recording. Will this be sent out? Yes, yes, right. We're going to send this out. Absolutely. John, we're getting a question about did you get a haircut? So I'm guessing internal.
You know,
John,
my hair was looking. That has to be somebody who's a client of ours, who knows that I was looking pretty shabby, and I did get my hair cut yesterday. So thank you. Uh,
Here- Here's a quick
hopefully,
question, John, and I
yeah.
think we can both answer this right from our own perspectives, right? It's is where do I start, right? I'm a young business, or I'm just trying to dive into all of this, right? Trying to change either my client base. Where should I start? Where this kind of seems overwhelming, right? And we went through a lot, like we went through a lot on this call. Where do I start? What is the most logical place for me to start?
Yeah, you want to answer that, or you want me to answer it?
No, we can both take a little take a shot at it, right? From my perspective, it's hey, look, there's some baseline securities that we need to have in place. Again, I'm always of the mind that a strong asset list, right, of both software and hardware is a critical component, right? Understanding what's in the environment, what's vulnerable, making sure everything is secured, and then putting in at least the baseline, what we call like basic cyber hygiene. Right. So some simple protocols, some simple controls in place, things like access control, right? MFA, easy, right? Anyone that doesn't have MFA today, it just gives me a ton of anxiety, right? Immediately. Um, a strong, workstation security solution, right? I'm looking at this all from a MSP perspective, right, on the tooling, but this is usually where I start. And then getting a baseline understanding of what is it that we have today, right? So getting that foundational, kind of framework or knowledge of what we have today, where do we want to go and how are we going to get there, right? And how are we going to get there in like securely, right? Not just by throwing new pieces of hardware or software into the environment, but what does it mean for us from a security perspective?
Yeah, and of course you would take it from the MSP perspective. I'm going to take it from the classical infosec guy's perspective, right? I
Yeah,
look at it as at the end of the day, information creates risk, right? So you got to understand what is the information that you have,
yeah,
and that's important and critical to the organization. If you understand that, if you understand client contractual obligations, if you're processing data on behalf of somebody else, what do they expect? Because if you don't meet their expectations, you can't have them as clients, you're out of business. Understand regulations that relate to that, right? So hey, this data is subject to HIPAA, this data is subject to payment card industry data security standards, whatever it is. Understanding that, understanding how that information lives within your organization, how it flows through your organization, understanding what third parties are touching that data, because we have to understand the risk associated with that. Because at the end of the day, every information security control is, if you always remember that a control is a mechanism that reduces risk. So my answer is always going to be, what are the risks that we're trying to manage, right? A policy is a control, a firewall is a control, any of the things we've talked about are control. So that's like a fundamental, just simply, and it doesn't have to be. One of the best risk assessments I've ever seen was a guy. We walked into a client, and the client he had a piece of paper on the bulletin board behind him, and it just said the guy ran a 3,000 person county in New Jersey, and it was the 5 risks that keep me awake at night. That was written up on the board behind him, and he looked at me and he says, "We want you to come in, and I want you to help me sleep. Help me figure out how to fix these 5 risks." And then we finished those 5 risks, and the guy said, "Here's the next 5." And literally year over year, that's every
yeah.
year we'd get a new contract with them, and it was always, how do you get to the next 5 risks? And I think it's a pretty solid way to manage your
Yeah,
information
yeah,
security program.
yeah. I mean, what's the best way to, or quickest way to eating an elephant, right? It's just one bite at a time. So take them
Exactly,
one at a time, right?
exactly.
We did get a question here, right? I'm assuming that the incident response testing, we can get help from you all. Yeah, absolutely, right. We're going to put some contact information up here in a second. So if you have questions around anything that we've talked about, feel free. You're going to be able to get in contact with us, right? We'll be able to kind of help navigate those waters with you. Other question here, John, is something I get asked all the time is about pen testing, right? And the importance of pen testing, right? And there's a greater call, right? Similar to incident response, plans and things like that. Just this greater call across the board for more pen test and pen test results, right? I get a lot of I speak to a lot of folks. Some folks tell me, "Hey, I'm too small to get a pen test." Right? Those are I don't see the point, right? I don't see the benefit of it. Let's talk a little bit about pen test. What are, from your perspective, right? What are going to be the strongest benefits of the pen test? Why should folks be focusing on them and getting them, right? What are going to be the benefits, and then what does it mean, right? What does it mean for a client to get one?
Yeah, so you're going to be surprised that we do a lot of pen testing, and a lot of times I'll tell clients don't do a pen test
Okay.
because I think you have to understand when you should and shouldn't do pen tests. So
Right.
one of the main reasons to do a pen test is because you're being asked for one, or it's a requirement of the standard, or your customers are saying, when was the last time you did a pen test, or your cyber liability insurance provider, right? So a lot of the times you're doing it because you have to do it. If you have a choice as to, am I doing this to assess my security or not? I would say if you have a very mature security program, a pen test is an excellent way to validate the net effectiveness of the program, right? So if you don't have a mature program, okay, well, pen tests is something called a vulnerability assessment that you can
Hmm.
actually run. And if you run the vulnerability, because a pen test exploits vulnerabilities that it finds, right?
Right.
A human
Right.
says, I found a vulnerability, let me exploit that. If there are no vulnerabilities, right, or if you know you have a lot of vulnerabilities, then just do the vulnerability assessment, identify the vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
ensure that you're pretty clean there. And then at that point, there's certain vulnerabilities that you can't get rid of. There's always a certain number that exist. The pen test at that point is okay, based on everything I've done, are any of these vulnerabilities exploitable? And if they are, what would be the impact to my organization if a malicious individual did exploit them? Because you might exploit a system that's got marketing material on it that you'd love for people to have, or you might have it might steal your source code as a software developer. It might
Yeah.
download a million records, individuals' records that are going to cost you 200 million in a breach notification.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's great because you and I sit on the same, kind of on the same stance on this, right? It's, hey, if you're being asked for it, right, and it's a requirement of a framework that you have to maintain, then look, you got to do it, right? There's not much that you're going to be able to do unless you can work something out or write something else out. If a client is asking for it, maybe it's talking to the client, right, trying to figure out what they're trying to get to, trying to get at. But I agree, right? If you don't need a pen test, right? I think even an annual or even an active vulnerability scan, right, kind of solves the same need, right? It's, hey, we need to identify what's weak in our system, right? Again, going back to the analogy, where's the open spot in my armor, right? And kind of trying to figure out where it's at, and then we can fix it, right? And that's probably more valuable to more people than the active vulnerable or the active penetration activities, right? That you're going to see in most pen tests.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Awesome. I know we're just about time here. We'll leave it open for, let me see if there's any more questions here. As an organization, we are well established ISO 27001. What's next for the ISO certification? With so many certifications available in ISO, what should we be looking at next to enhance my program?
Depends on your industry, depends on the type of data. But generally speaking, what we're seeing a lot of people doing is if you're getting beat up for resilience, ISO 22301, business continuity.
Mhm.
If you're getting beat up for privacy, ISO 27701. If you're getting beat up for AI, ISO 42001, right? If you want to stack ISO certs. And then,
Yep.
of course, a lot of our clients that are ISO certified are also using other standards. So we've got clients that are, let's say, in the defense industrial base, and we're moving them to CMMC, where they're
Yep.
dealing with federal agencies, and we're moving with FedRAMP or FedRAMP or ASRAMP or TexRAMP or State
Yep.
ramp. So it really does depend on who your clients are, what their expectations are, and the types of data that you're processing.
Awesome. Yeah, I would agree completely. Awesome. Well, I know we're just at time here. We're just at the 3:01. We're a minute over. Want to wrap it up, right? So we're here to help. Absolutely, right? You have my information and John's information is up on the screen. This is being recorded, so we are going to send a copy of this out to everyone who attended or who registered. Really thankful for everyone and grateful for everyone who attended. Hopefully you found some benefit out of this, right? And if there's any questions, feel free to reach out, right? We're here to help. We're here to answer those questions and provide any type of insight that we possibly can.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you all.